Channing Godfrey Peoples is the writer and director behind the new film Miss Juneteenth. I'm Kevin Jacobsen of Gold Derby here with Channing, and this is your feature directorial debut. Um, what would you say was the inspiration to tell this story in particular and to make it your debut here?
Oh my goodness. I hope we have enough time. And I say that because it's such a personal film, and it's such a vulnerable place to be in, really, just because the film's so personal. It's like, laying your soul bare for the world to see. I grew up in a historically Black community in Texas, and I have a great respect for this particular community. At one time it was this bustling Black enclave of like Black commerce, and today it's being gentrified. And it really, the businesses that remain are legacy businesses that get passed down through the generations. So I wanted to write about this particular community, and I also wanted to write about a woman, a Black woman in particular, who is navigating her own dream deferred. And, Miss Juneteenth was born. There's just so many factors. I also loved the Miss Juneteenth pageant. And, I won't go on and on about that now. I can explain a little bit more what that is later. But there were just several inspirations for the film, even personal ones like the women in my life.
And Juneteenth itself is something that I think more and more people are aware of now. A lot of white people certainly become educated on it more over the years that might have not even heard of it before. How much of a balance did you want to strike between educating people in the audience who might not understand the full history of Juneteenth and what it represents versus, like, not getting too bogged down and making it like a kind of history lesson?
You know, um, I talked a little bit earlier about the community that I grew up in being an influence. And, one of the things that I recognize about this particular community is that there is this sense of people are just really alive, and there's a color and they live out loud, and they live authentically. And I think that influenced the way in which I wanted to approach the film. I wanted it to feel as authentic as possible. As a writer, and even as a director, I approach things from inside out. That's my process. I have an acting background as well. And so Juneteenth in and of itself, for people who are unfamiliar, acknowledges the fact that the slaves in Texas didn't find out they were free until 2.5 years after everyone else. So in Texas, we commemorated on June 19th. And so I really thematically was navigating this idea, especially for each of the characters, of what happens for each of these characters when freedom comes too late. And so thematically, Juneteenth has always been, a focal point in the film, but I wanted to see these characters authentically be living life and just seeing how that was impacting them.
Yeah. And well, Turquoise is such a fascinating character with a lot of layers. And I'm curious how fully formed she was in your mind as you started writing the script, or if just her personality and her behavior kind of evolved naturally as you were writing it.
Yeah, there's a combination of things, and hopefully I'll answer your question fully. She is, I mentioned a little bit about this earlier. Turquoise is based on the women in my life, and the women in the community in which I grew up. My grandmother, my aunts, and most especially my mother. One of the things that I saw that these women in particular had in common, they had a grit, a determination, but they always carried themselves with grace, no matter, how their feet, how, much their feet were put to the fire, or what they had to face. And my mother was single for much of my life. And I can remember watching her as a child, and her, trying to find a way to navigate her own dreams and raise children at the same time. And it was always a balancing act. And she was involved in the arts as a kid. She took us to a small community theater in our neighborhood. It was a Black community theater called Sojourner Truth. And so I fell in love with storytelling, and I got to see really complex Black plays there. And, I can see how that impacted me now. But I literally wrote the film, I think, from the vantage point of, having watched my mother, which influences Turquoise's journey. But coincidentally, right around the time I found out we were going to get the green light to make the film, I found out I was pregnant with the daughter, of course. And so that changed my point of view, even, not entirely, but there was a tougher love version, I think, of Turquoise on paper. And then once I had my daughter, there was just this instant moment that I had with her that I was like, wow, I am responsible for this little human being to have the best life. Like in reality, I was navigating what Turquoise was going through in the script that I wrote, know. And so for me, it informed the journey in a different way. I needed to find a way to bring the joy of the mother-daughter bond to the film as well.
That's an amazing story. And I really think the success of the film is really contingent upon finding the right actress to play Turquoise. Why did Nicole Bahari feel like the right fit to play her?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, I will say that I am I talked a little bit about earlier about, at least I think I did, excuse me if I didn't, but I have a very naturalistic approach to writing and directing. I love being able to have actors be able to sit in quiet moments, and in this particular journey, we're not only navigating Turquoise moving through the story there, we're also with her, there's moments where we're with her internally. And so I think Nicole is an actor who definitely can bring that type of subtlety and nuance to her roles. At least that's what I'm familiar with her body of work, but that's what I saw in particular in her read of Turquoise. And that excited me. I will tell you that and especially in the case of Miss Juneteenth, it's such a specific film. It really is about the place that I grew up. I know the people, I know the world. And so I'm pretty stickler about dialogue and things like that. I write like I hear people talk, that's on the page, and so we stay close to that. But it's the little moments in between where we're even processing what Turquoise is thinking, and Nicole is the caliber of actor that can definitely nail those moments.
Sure, and you can see it on the screen in this film for sure. We also have a debut performance here in Alexis Chikezi as Turquoise's daughter Kai, and it really surprised me to learn that this was her first role in a movie. What made Alexis special when you were looking to cast for her?
Yeah, the description, one of the early description of Kai is, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, okay, but I'm going to paraphrase as much as I can. It's something like Kai 14, her eyes look like she's seen too much too soon. And so she had this sense, even in the auditions, that I just wanted to reach out to her, personally. And it wasn't anything, that she was just bringing, it was just authentic and natural. And I was like, wow, that's what I would love to see for Kai, because I feel like this character is in like, um, she's in such a vulnerable place, like where she's deciding like who she wants to be and trying to find the space and the freedom for who she wants to be. And it was important for me to have an actor that we definitely felt for. And I found that in Alexis. And yes, this is her first film. And I remember like I was initially like, I knew she would be fine, but I said, me, it's a debut film. I love working with experienced actors and, have been fortunate to for some time. But I was just like, it's her first film. I just want to be able to do her justice. And we sat down together before we shot, and I went through the script with her reading as Turquoise and talked to her about my ideas for pace and tone and what I felt like the film was. She's also a regional actor, so that was helpful. And she nailed it.
I agree. Yeah. Well, going back to Turquoise, there are just so many elements of Turquoise that I find so fascinating, just in the little details. One of them actually being that she works part time at a funeral home. And I noticed just from looking at your short films that you've done in the past that it's not a new subject matter for you. So I'm just curious about why you wanted to include that as part of Turquoise's story as well.
Kevin, you're in here telling my business. Um, so for me as a filmmaker, yes, grief is definitely a theme in which I often explore. And part of that is because the actual funeral home that you see in Miss Juneteenth is called Baker Funeral Home. And it is owned by family friends who, in the South, sometimes we have family that's not blood family. So they're like my aunts and uncles and grandmother. And I grew up, running in and out of the funeral home, to be honest. Like my mom may drop us off, after school while she finished work. Her best friend owned this particular funeral home. And so we're there. So my idea of death, while there was a sadness associated with it, the Bakers as a funeral home, there's a dignity in which they navigate grief. And so it ends up in my films, a lot of times. And, Turquoise is there. She's doing makeup in a funeral home. She's juggling, but she's doing it with a certain respect and reverence. And that's what I saw growing up.
Hmm. Well, another thing I found interesting was just the inclusion of Turquoise's mother, because this could have been just a story of a mother and a daughter, and you just leave it at that. But this is a real generational story with three generations of women. So why was it important to you to include Turquoise's mother in the narrative as well?
Because we're navigating a story that's very much present day. There's I think I don't want to count them, but there's tiny little flashbacks. I wanted people to be fully present in who Turquoise was now, and not be focused on flashing back to who she was then, because the story really is about this woman who has this dream deferred, and how is she finding a way to reconcile that dream. And so it's important for me to have her mother present, as a character that informs like who she was in the past, and also represents like Turquoise having won Miss Juneteenth in the past, and what are the reasons that she wasn't able to sustain it? She didn't have the appropriate support, and that character tells that story in her own way. But I also wanted her to be a fully realized character who's navigating her own difficulties.
Yeah. It's very past, present, future, all throughout. I think it's very interesting. So, the film premieres at the Sundance Film Festival about this time last year, actually, which feels like forever ago. It gets rave reviews. What was the whole whirlwind of that like for you, as far as the lead up to the first screening and then seeing that positive reception that you got?
I mean, there's so many emotions involved because my husband was one of the producers on the film, and he is my creative collaborator. And he had gone through the Sundance Creative Producing Lab in 2017, and I'd done some intensives with them. And so we'd gone through the institute, but there's never any guarantee that you'll play at Sundance. So when we got the call, it was just like over the moon, elated, because we very much wanted to premiere the film there. They felt like family. So there was that, and then there's the anxiety of getting the film ready, to screen in front of the world, and and also to for a debut film, like I mentioned earlier, it's so personal. So now the world is, you're opening up the world to your life, and so much so that my baby daughter even appears at the end of the film. you know so there was it was both, joyful and, there were nerves involved and everything. But I think I was most concerned with making sure that I had portrayed the community as respectfully as possible, because this film really was a film that was made with the cooperation of the community. They supported me for many years, in which I was pushing the film up the hill. I had the idea for the film probably a decade ago, and it took us like 7 years to get it made, once I had a decent draft. And so I would go back every year, in the community and say, we're making this film, hang in there for us, And so there was also this documentary approach and involving the community so that the film could feel as authentic as possible.
And I'm so intrigued by this. It was just announced a few days ago that you are looking to adapt Miss Juneteenth into a TV show as part of a first look deal. Very exciting. What is it about this story that you think could really suit the medium of television as well?
Well, Miss Juneteenth is navigating several worlds, and it is, there are characters that I personally love, and want to follow their journeys. It's the whole television part of this is very new. It's incredible, really, and honestly, it's very, very early days as far as the series goes. So I just can't say a lot right now. What I can say is that I'm pleased that, UCP is who I have the first look deal with. And I appreciate that they saw the humanity of the characters and the richness of this world. And that was what I was going for in telling the story of the film, and Miss Juneteenth is part of it. There's so many stories that I want to tell. And I just feel fortunate that they shared my goal of like wanting to create like very specific culturally rich stories, because that's what I want to continue to do and put out in the world.
Yeah, well, we're looking forward to seeing what those are. Yeah. Channing, thank you so much for talking with me today. It was a pleasure.
Oh my goodness. There's one thing that I wanted to tell you before I leave.
Go ahead.
Okay. We did not talk inspirations for the film, and I have to tell you inspirations really quick. Other than the
Yeah.
community, the women in my life, there's a couple of inspirations that I had. I loved Gordon Parks' segregation series. That was a big visual inspiration for the film. Like I needed the film to feel like it had a sense of like grit in it, just because I feel like the people in this community are gritty and determined and graceful. But I also was really inspired by literature growing up. And so I would read books by like Toni Morrison and Alice Walker and all these different women who were telling really complex stories about Black women. And so I forgot when you asked me earlier, just about like influences for Turquoise, that made me want to create like more complex stories about Black women. And there's another poem that really influenced me, which was Langston Hughes' Harlem. And it asked the question, what happens when a dream deferred? So that's what I would keep in mind that's in writing this entire script, like what happens to Turquoise when her dream has been deferred. So I had influences and I just wanted to make sure and tell you those because those are important to like the journey of this
Yeah,
film.
I'm glad you got to get all of that in there. So yes, thank you so much, Channing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And for those of you watching, hit like and subscribe for more interviews and head to goldderby.com to make your awards season predictions.